I think when people are like, money does not buy happiness, etc., I think that's a very incomplete statement. It absolutely does. It buys comfort, it buys happiness. It doesn't buy you fulfillment or end happiness, but it does help you go along that journey. The end destination was like never the goal. The journey was always the goal. Understand how to recalibrate into your new environment, pause, reflect, and don't actually get caught away with the tide like very quickly, right? Which in entrepreneurship, this is how things work. Like everything you know as an entrepreneur and an operator, which is just to go, 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 but to pause, reflect, and then, kind of adapt to that new normal and then start making, decisions.
Thank you for joining me, man. I'm excited
Yeah,
for
man.
this.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Happy to help.
All right, let's dive right in. You just won the Powerball lottery. What does the next 2 years look like for you?
I think I would just be doing the same thing, to be honest. That sounds weird. Probably at a different scale and like with some different details, etc. But Sieva, as you know, like we just had an exit, right? Bringing a private equity firm in, obviously a much smaller scale than $2 billion. But I would say that like when that transaction happened for a week or so, I was kind of in this mindset of, okay, we've accomplished our goal. There's like nothing left to do. Let's just go like relax on a beach and hang out. And then your mind just kind of keeps saying, okay, well, what is the next thing? And I think what you understand from that experience is the end destination was like never the goal. The journey was always the goal. And so it's probably a pithy answer, and I'm sure there's like some nuance and like fun details that would go behind it, but I really think I'd be doing the same thing. Like I love building businesses, I love meeting interesting people, I love traveling, etc. And so I can't actually imagine a combination of not having like those types of components. I'm sure some of the headaches of operating your business and being in the grind definitely go away. But with that come like other issues and other problems too, right? I would hate the public recognition or denotion of everybody knowing you've won this like massive thing. I think that's probably a side topic, but I think you and I both know a lot of people that have kind of won publicly in a very big way, and there's a lot of unintended negative consequences that come with that too. But I think the short answer is I'd probably do the same thing.
Yeah, I think my answer is similar. The conversation my girlfriend and I had yesterday was, first of all, you don't tell anyone, maybe your parents at most, because that very quickly ruins your life, I think. The second thing is my position is do nothing for like 2 or 3 years, like just buy T-bills, let it make, $40 million a year for you right now. And maybe buy a house, like a slightly nicer house. But other than that, like really try to bury the lead, like try not to change your life in a way that other people notice, and I'd certainly be still running and during, like I can't imagine doing anything.
I think at every scale, it's actually a similar answer, just with different numbers, right? So I think that decision framework of like, don't do anything for a year or 2 years or so, regardless of if these numbers are, 40,000 or 40 million, it's actually the same concept and the same framework, which is basically understand how to recalibrate into your new environment. Pause, reflect, and don't actually get caught away with the tide like very quickly, right? Which in entrepreneurship, this is how things work. Like you get these kind of step moment functions. And so in those step moment functions, I think it's really important to actually not do anything. And that's actually unwiring everything you know as an entrepreneur and an operator, which is just to go, go, go.
Yeah.
But to pause, reflect, and then kind of adapt to that new normal and then start making, decisions.
Let's talk a little bit about those step functions as entrepreneurs, because that's a realization I had like a couple of years ago. I think from the outside, everyone assumes like either you're not making money or you're making a lot of money. But my experience in entrepreneurship is like, you're not making any money, you're not really making any money. And then all of a sudden you make a ton of money, or you make like a disproportionate amount of money. I had that happen to me when I had my exit. I worked for like 10 years and I made some money. I had equity. And then one of my businesses sold and I had a windfall. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I think I understand how this entrepreneurship thing works. You can get like 10 times richer and then be in the same place for years. What has been your experience with that? What have you seen?
Very similar. And I think it requires like a mental adjustment, because you don't actually see, in many ways, you see progress in your business in terms of growth, et cetera, but you don't really see progress in like other types of areas that other folks like traditionally see progress in, right? Like your bank account, for example. Like you're exactly right. You're kind of just like floating by and able to live. and then you get kind of this huge like step function outcome if you're fortunate to get the step function outcome, right? Like the step function outcome is not guaranteed by any stretch. I think what it does though is, at least for me, what it has done, it's really trained me to live my life actually like quite frugally and quite
Mm-hmm.
minimalistically. Because there's impossibility, like there's really no possibility of lifestyle creep if you think about it, because there's no opportunity for lifestyle creep, right? And that's where, just going back to what we were talking about of like when you do get a windfall or if you do get a little bit of success, et cetera, kind of pausing, reflecting, et cetera, before acting, right, is really important. Because actually, if you're able to kind of overcome that and stay pretty consistent, right, with how you've been living or so, what you end up finding, I think, as an operator is you manage your own personal burn, kind of like you manage your company, which is just like very like responsibly and frugally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's not to say everybody does that, but that's been kind of my experience. And so I think what I found a lot of, and what kind of gives me just like great happiness, is it's awesome to have an outcome. Like there's no question about it. I think when people are like money does not buy happiness, et cetera, I think that's a very incomplete statement. I think it absolutely does. It buys comfort, it buys happiness, et cetera. It doesn't buy you fulfillment or end happiness, right? But it does help you go along that journey. But I think what it's done very specifically for me is it's given me a very good understanding of the things that really matter in life, money can't buy. And so if you kind of focus on this end outcome is the goal of life, or what's going to trigger on happiness, you're not really thinking through it the right way. And so it's given me and my wife, we were just talking about this a couple months ago actually, just like a really nice patience for like frugal, minimal lifestyle. And I think what we've learned actually is like that's minimized our headaches significantly, and it's actually given us more time and space to do the things we actually enjoy, versus managing a second house or a this or a that or whatever it is, which is you can very quickly become just like a slave to your stuff,
Yeah.
as opposed to just having the freedom to do whatever you want.
What is that meaningful happiness that money can't buy?
I think money can't buy contentment, relationships, peace of mind, clarity of thought. Money can absolutely buy opportunity to get you all of those things, meaning it can buy you comfort, it can buy you access, it can buy you the freedom to go away, for a couple weeks and clear your head, etc. So I think money can be a really nice accent to all of those core things. But money ultimately can't buy you friendships. It can't buy you good relationships with your family. It can't.
It can
It
buy you
can buy.
fake friends.
It can buy you fake friends.
You may not be able to
Um,
tell sometimes.
yeah, which is another danger. Which is also why it's super important, I think, to like in matters of money or success, et cetera. Like what we've learned, I think when you're growing up as an entrepreneur, like all you want is to be recognized and like have your name on the article and your face at the front, et cetera. I think what you learn to appreciate a little bit more actually as you grow more maturely is being in the background and actually not having people know as much kind of publicly or about everything is actually really great, because it actually doesn't then impede on your relationships and your friendships, right? Whether those are childhood relationships, family relationships, etc. It never becomes a topic of consternation or something that gets in the way. It's something that if you want to use it as a tool or mechanism to support or kind of enrich the experience, you're able to, you have that flexibility, but it doesn't become an obstacle or something in the way.
I think I know the answer then to this common question. Would you rather
Okay.
be wealthy and unknown or famous and not wealthy?
Wealthy and unknown, 100%. I think so I think people that answer that question in the inverse, there's two elements to it. One, and I think there's two barbells, and they might not be mutually exclusive. One side of the barbell, I think, is like deep insecurity, right? Deep insecurity and need for validation. So what does fame and recognition really get you at the end of the day? It gets you people saying you're cool, you're smart, you're good looking, we value you, etc. That's important. It's important to have validation from others. I think we all live as one large society. But when validation from others is more important than validation from your oneself, or validation from others that you know less well is more important than validation from those that know you much better, I think that's misplaced, and that's typically from some source of insecurity, vanity, ego, etc. Right? So I think a lot of people shame fame, etc. for that reason. I think there's a subset of people that chase fame because it's a proxy to them for impact and recognition, right? And that's why I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. I think if you anchor more in that latter camp from
Mhm.
a pure kind of altruistic perspective, it probably speaks just more to your personality. My personality, you know me very well, is I'd rather kind of be in the like in the backgrounds and reserved and know a small group of people really really well,
Yeah.
as opposed to have hundreds of millions of people know me necessarily. But there's also friends in our friend group that are the opposite and are totally built for that, right?
Sure. Sure.
And so I think it's partly a personality thing, but for me, it's a I would if you asked me that question, I think 5 years ago, it would have been a much, I think, more I'm not sure 50-50 kind of question. But for me now, as a little bit kind of more mature, a little bit older, etc., having had some veneer of success, it's a no-brainer what the answer to that question is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be pretty embarrassed to admit to this, but my girlfriend and I have been watching the latest Kardashians. I
Amazing.
never used to watch it.
Yeah, we watch it
Uh,
all the time. They're
I, I
amazing.
I'm so happy to hear that
Yeah.
because for years I didn't watch it. I was just like, they're bad for the world, they're bad for
Yeah.
society. And sometime in the last 6 to 12 months, I've just become so enamored with them.
I think
Like
they're great.
I
I
think they're
think
great.
they're like the smartest business people in the world. I think they get
Absolutely.
no credit at all for it, which
Yeah.
is astounding to me. I think they are the definition of influencer, brand, etc. And they are very impressive. Like they
Yes.
are very, very impressive.
Tier one entrepreneurs. They know
Yes.
how to capture the attention. They know the latest like zeitgeist. They know how to capture your attention. They know how to extract capital, right? Because there's like plenty of people that can capture attention, but
Yeah.
don't make any money on it. You know, you look up their net worth and they're worth
Yeah.
like 20 to 50 million, which is a lot. But for
Yeah.
somebody that's like a world class like actor,
Totally.
model, sometimes I'm surprised by how what people's net worth is, whereas like here, like the Kardashians, they're all billionaires. You
Yeah.
know, it's incredible.
I think they get way less credit. And I think people look outside in at folks like them and just say, oh, okay, they capture a lot of attention.
Mhm.
Sure, they do, right? They're great at top of the funnel. There's a lot of people that are great at top of the funnel,
Yeah.
right? But their ability to actually execute, create products, create ideas, hire, surround themselves with the right people, et cetera, they're consummate business people.
Yeah.
Like they're very, very solid.
Agreed.
Very solid.
Agreed. They're like
Yeah.
tier one entrepreneurs. The reason I brought them up is because in one of the episodes, or maybe like throughout episodes, I'm kind of new to this. Kim says, like, I love the attention. And you
Yeah.
rarely hear that. Like it's almost like, you know, most people when asked directly, they'll be like, oh, like, you know, I don't really love the attention, even though you see them in front of the camera all the time. Kim
Yeah.
like wholeheartedly just admits it, accepts it, like envelops it. And I
Yeah.
wonder if it you know, maybe both like insecurity and reach, or maybe like reach and wealth. Like do you have a read on it? It sounds like you watched the show.
Yeah, I think it's a combo of all of the above, right? Like I think when you watch the show, one of the things that's interesting to me about it is like how raw and open they are, right?
Mhm.
And so how much it's evident, and this is not in a pejorative way, like I think this is a part of just the human condition. It's very evident how there's elements of insecurity, vanity, right? Ego, kind of all of the above. And I think a lot of the fame and the recognition that comes with it is kind of both ends of the spectrum, right? I think you have folks, and they've talked about it on the show, folks that just left, right, and center, kind of constantly all day will comment on their personal lives, say how moronic they are, et cetera, et cetera, and then they have like their super fans are, will kiss the ground they walk on, like it's the ultimate level of super fan, right? And so I think it goes back to a personality thing, which is like there are some people that super thrive on that and get energy from that. And then there's other people, I'm sure like Kim's private equity partner, right? That thrives from like not being in the limelight and thrives from being kind of in the shadows and doing the intellectual work and being very well revered in kind of a closer, tighter knit, but not being kind of the mainstay out on the public stage.
Do you know anything about that private equity fund? I actually just saw it announced, but I haven't done any research on it.
I don't know a ton about it. I know the folks from Carlisle that they've partnered with and are putting together are super well respected in kind of the CPG space. And I think it's the perfect stage of private asset allocation that somebody like Kim Kardashian should be getting involved in. I mean, just think about like there's two ways to think about it, right? One is, you know, all the tech press and kind of or I should say the mainstream press, et cetera, and kind of the veneer goes around like tech companies and innovation and so on and so forth. But as you very well know, Sieva, there's so much product market fit risk in those ventures, right? You don't know if the product is actually going to work. You don't know if the market is actually there, et cetera. Private equity is literally the perfect zone for somebody like Kim Kardashian to be operating in, because
Yeah.
everything works. And now she gets to add complete gasoline onto the fire. And think about what the relative pitch is as an entrepreneur when you're talking to like 4 PE firms. You go talk to KKR and they say, hey, we're experts at restructuring. You talk to Blackstone and they say, we're experts at, we've got all these advisors and so on and so forth. You talk to TPG, they say, we're like the deepest pockets in the world. And you go and talk to Kim Kardashian, and she's like, I will literally give you 2 million customers tomorrow.
That's right.
Right. I mean, like the ability, the right stage that they've hit. And again, I think this just speaks to their like business savvy. They've hit the right stage. And then the competitive landscape in that stage, they're going to be positioned to totally dominate. Right.
Yeah.
So I think the fund is it's a couple billion. I think it's around a $3 billion fund or so. And I would imagine they would take very concentrated bets and probably, have the ability to, build a really, really interesting kind of next generation platform of consumer companies.
I imagine this is the first of many, like to your point, I think this is the exact right stage if you have a big audience. Like
Yeah.
I look at Serena Williams venture capital fund or any other version of a venture capital fund like that. I think like Kevin Durant has one. Ashton Kutcher, of course, has one.
Yeah.
That is a good stage because it allows you to get into the company. But I think you're like kind of limited by how much value you can create, even as a celebrity. Whereas here, like you said, if you get the right product market fit for Kim's brand, it could 10x the business, it could 100x the business, right?
Yeah.
So I think
that's actually why I think a lot of these, like a lot of the real tier one, because even in athletics, et cetera, is, there's like the super tier ones, right? And then and we've talked about this before because you've come to a couple of the events that we've put on that have, a bunch of athletes and operators, et cetera. It's been really surprising actually to learn that if you're not kind of in that top 10-ish group, let's say in the NBA or so, even if you are a perennial all-star, kind of a top 20 to 50 kind of guy, et cetera, you're making a crazy amount of money. There's no question about it. But your ability to get into the absolute best deals, et cetera, is actually not as high as I would have perceived. And so I think what I'm seeing kind of the really savvy guys that are in that 20 to 50 zone or so that have a ton of money, still have great access, et cetera, is a lot of them are participating in later stage type opportunities, are helping incubate opportunities, et cetera, where they can have disproportionate value, as opposed to just being kind of we can put our brand on this. And because of that, like LeBron put his brand on Blaze pizzas and it just becomes like the most successful pizza company, right? Like there's only a handful of people in the world that can do that. And for those types of people, I think it makes complete sense to go to a very, very proven operation. Don't take any of the actual risk of the business on and just add gasoline to the fire.
I hate saying second tier, but let's just say not LeBron level celebrities.
Right. Which is crazy to think about, like calling like somebody that's top 25 in the world at something like basketball second tier. Right.
That's right.
But here we are.
That's right.
Yeah.
Tier 1, A+ as far as I'm concerned, but not LeBron level or Kim Kardashian. It actually seems like for those groups, it's better to like syndicate their energy and their power. Like I have a friend that worked on Ray J's headphone company. And speaking of Kim Kardashian, and Ray J's headphone company wasn't taking off. They came in, they helped him out, but he was able to leverage his contacts with like Snoop Dogg and other rappers and athletes to grow the business. And now it's like a multi-$100 million, or it's $100 million revenue business. So that works as well.
For sure.
So as you may know, our good friend Elon Musk loves to listen to this pod. Give him 2 pieces of advice for Twitter.
Man, I'm certainly not qualified to give Elon Musk any advice. So I think 2 things, right? I was thinking about this a lot the last couple of days of just observing, because I feel like your Twitter feed is probably the same. Mine is all day, every day is about Elon and Twitter right now. Like that's it, right? There's no other conversation.
He has our attention.
He has our attention. So I think on the positive side, he's unbelievable at harnessing attention. I actually think on balance, It is good for these platforms to revert to kind of their essence and core of being a digital town square, which is to be moderate politically. I think there's a lot of faction of the internet and the user base that is not giving any benefit of the doubt at all, right? Which is kind of similar to politics. It's like you've already made up your mind. Um, regardless of what this guy is coming in and doing. And we've seen that with, advertisers kind of pulling out of the platform, et cetera, when content moderation, et cetera, hasn't even changed yet. And so I think generally it feels a lot more chaotic than it actually is. And I say that from the following perspective. Anybody that's ever been involved in any M&A or any big corporate turnover, et cetera, right? Or candidly, any fast growing business knows it's chaos from the inside every single day. It would be 100 times more chaotic, or the perception would be 100 times more chaotic if there was a microphone and a spotlight on every single thing that was going on, right? And so I think the veneer and the outside look is Twitter is just a complete clown show right now. There's no controls, everything is all over the place, etc. And my challenge back to folks that say that is, if you've been in any company that's ever scaled or seen the inside of any startup or any large company, candidly, that 98% of what's going on was probably already happening pre Elon, anyways. Like the guy has barely gotten in there and had much of a chance to change things up, right? So I think overall, and again, this is speaking very outside in, I think overall the situation is probably very overblown on how chaotic it actually is. That's number one. Number two is I actually think in this case, what he's doing really well, and whether it proves out, to be kind of right or wrong, is he's taking an opinion, right? I think the thing that has actually like made Twitter struggle for a very long time is kind of this lack of taking firm opinions and firm hard stances. And I think what's going to come out is you're going to see a lot of people that say, "Great, I want to actually use the platform because there's going to be more certainty or more clarity on what's going on." And then there are going to be people that are going to go away because they're going to say, "Hey, this is terrible. I don't identify with these, political views," not recognizing or realizing that every company you're a consumer of doesn't necessarily align with your political views anyways, right? So I think actually taking an opinion is good. I think the two things to your question, just to get into the specifics of like what would I do if I was him, I think one is you have to fix the bot problem. I think the bot problem is like completely degrading everybody's user
Is that
experience.
something you've personally experienced? Because I don't personally, maybe a few times, but I don't see it hasn't been a huge problem for me at least.
So I think you're going to start facing it soon because now your follower count is what, like around 75,000 or so,
That's right.
right? Yeah. So it starts like exponentially becoming an issue, right?
Okay.
So I noticed that once I crossed like 75-ish, I started having more and more fake accounts. Once I crossed 100 on a lot of my posts, I would start having like all this like crypto spam that'd be coming
Mhm.
on, etc. Right. So I think it exponentially grows. And the problem is like those are the power users of the platform, and those are those are the posts that get the most amount of reach. So I think the bot problem like absolutely has to be fixed. And I think going private where you're not under the veneer of, hey, Wall Street, here's our usage metric every single quarter, and we need to manage the stock price very, very carefully, actually gives a lot of breathing room and a lot of space to fixing that problem. Right. I think the second thing is um, from a subscriptions perspective, I think Twitter is wildly undermonetized, right? Like wildly undermonetized. I think creators can monetize more, although I kind of take the side of the camp that um the whole creator economy in space is kind of overblown. I think everything is a tail outcome in that space generally.
Yeah.
But I do think there are monetization tools, right, that can encourage people to post more content on Twitter. Like it's kind of crazy to me that the algorithm kills you for linking to something else, but then gives you no native abilities to actually publish to the platform. So I think if you start giving people more amplification in the algorithm and actual monetization for having embedded videos, so on and so forth, newsletters, that are natively in the platform itself. I think you're going to pull more content onto Twitter natively and make it a richer experience as opposed to punishing people for linking out. So I would clean up like the bots problem for sure, and I would figure out how do you actually start using like subscription revenue to monetize, because the minute you start making subscriptions um, the actual business model versus ads, like we are now not all the product. Twitter becomes the product for us to use. And I think having taken this company private as opposed to keeping it in the public eyes actually allows you to take that kind of bold business model transformation shift that you just would not be able to, otherwise, right? I also think the third thing, and this is not like a specific recommendation, but this just goes back to the earlier part of like, I think it's less chaotic. I think he's taking a point of view. I think going private is better. I also think like Elon is very mission driven in all his companies. And so you're going to get a lot of people that come out of the woodworks that would have said, do I really want to work at like the nth social network? There's all these other social products. Twitter is kind of a 1.0 product, et cetera. I actually think you're going to get a lot of strong talent that's going to say, I want to come work for this guy. Right. So net, I'm actually bullish. Like, I actually think it's positive. I know, like it feels like everything is chaos and the whole world is falling out under us, et cetera. And I typically think that that's in general in life that's overblown. There's always less truth to those types of reactions. But I'm actually generally pretty net bullish on Twitter right now with Elon at the helm.
All right, Elon, you heard him. We've got some feedback for you, buddy. I certainly agree that for people that aren't builders, I think, or founders, it's hard to realize how messy companies are. Like, it's just a total shit show, right? You're trying to organize people that speak different languages. They look different. They come from different cultures. It's just chaos, right? You think politics is chaos? Like, companies are full chaos.
Totally.
I remember circa 2000, let's say, I think it was 14. I was in 500 Startups, which is an accelerator for my startup. And the CFO of Twitter at the time came and talked to us. It was a long time ago. And his stories were insane. Like, he wouldn't let us record the session just because he wanted to speak openly and honestly. But hearing him talk about the business, they had a day where the whole engineering team quit. Like, they were having the fail whale, and it was just chaos inside of the company. They had 50 engineers. I think it was like 50 of like 75 engineers at the time or something like that. Yeah. Maybe 50 of 100, and they just quit. And overnight, there was just nobody managing Twitter. And he had all of these stories. Like, that was just one of them where you're like, any one of those should have killed you. But obviously the network effects and the value that the core Twitter product was providing was such that like people were willing to stick around despite the site being down for days and sometimes, like hours at a time.
I think that's what you recognize when you build businesses or you're on the inside of businesses, right? Is like, ultimately there's a service that somebody needs. Like, when you truly find product market fit, and forget the scale of the business, like forget if it's like Google and you're changing the world, or it's our company that's of decent size and services, hundreds of customers, or it's kind of the local like mom and pop ice cream shop, right? That's not a big brand. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what do those three organizations or entities actually need, right? The ice cream shop at the end of the day is responsible for giving you good ice cream, right? Now, if you have to wait in line one day, or your favorite flavor's not there, or the price is a little bit higher, like all those things matter and will have impact on whether you keep going to that, ice cream store or whatever, and how good of a business or how big of a business can that ultimately be. But for the fact that you like the ice cream and they're good at that one thing in delivering you the ice cream, you will at least probably frequent that shop to go get ice cream, right?
Yeah.
And so what it shares kind of outside in is everything can be breaking, and often everything is breaking, but the whole world is actually a lot more brittle than people realize, because our expectations for things that we need are actually a lot lower than people also realize, right? And our patience and kind of tolerance for things not working is actually pretty high subconsciously, right? And so I think like generally you're completely spot on, Sieva. People don't kind of get this concept or idea of outside in, you can put a good gloss and a good story and it seems like everything is smooth. And by the way, people do this in their careers all the time. I think like when I'm sure this is the case for you, when I talk to people that are earlier in their career, it's very easy to look at somebody's LinkedIn or their profile or so and say, hey, this story was up and to the right, right? And it's very easy to reverse engineer the exact chronology and the exact lineage and each of the decision points of what got you from one place to the other and why like this whole story has been kind of completely smooth and made a lot of sense. And the reality when you dig in is like it's filled with winding turns and mishaps and luck and
Sure. Times when people
randomness
almost
and
quit and failures. Yeah,
exactly,
absolutely.
right. And I think anybody that's made it to the other side, I do firmly believe this, having just gone through an M&A experience, that getting to the other side, I think, is the hardest thing in business. Like actually crossing the line is very, very difficult. But I think anybody that has crossed the line, if they were completely intellectually honest, would say that there were at least 5 points in that pathway to crossing the line where it was very non-obvious, not only that they were not going to cross the line, it was very non-obvious there was going to be a line,
Right.
period. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that actually gives you a lot of humility the longer that you do this, because you recognize that there's a lot of people out there that have succeeded at 10x the scale, 50x the scale, whatever it is. And I certainly don't believe ever, this is my like one of my other kind of pet peeves, similar to when people say money doesn't buy happiness. I really don't like when people say like everybody's just figuring it out and nobody knows what they're doing. I think that's completely false. I think people absolutely know what they're doing. And there is a lot of skill and intellect and hard work, et cetera, that goes into business. But what I do believe is the scale of the outcome is very much so a drop in the hat, right?
Mhm.
Which is very much so dependent on luck. So things I think you can control are things like your idea about the product, your idea about the market, your ability to build a team, so on and so forth. But you have to multiply that by a factor of like 0 to 1,000x in terms of the end ultimate outcome, right? That actually comes out, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you actually get a lot of humility for realizing that, that guy that sold his company for 50 million or 100 million or 500 million very easily could have sold his company for 0, 5, or 10,
Yeah.
and the inverse is the case too. The person that sold their company for 10 million could have sold their company for 100 million, had a couple customers or a couple people, just bounce the right way.
I think before I move on, by the way, I want to call out one thing that I really appreciate about you is when we started this question on Twitter, I asked you to give Elon advice. And the first thing you said was, well, I don't think I'm qualified to do that. And I just think that's such a beautiful humility. And if everybody in the world had an ounce of humility, let's just say 2% humility in those types of questions, I just think it would be undoubtedly a better place. And Twitter would also be a better place, speaking of.
I
Uh,
appreciate that. I think it's really important, actually. I mean, I think it's there was a tweet somebody put out this morning, which I thought was great, which was it had to do, it's a little bit different, but it's related. It had to do with second time founders.
yeah.
Um, and what somebody wrote was they were like, the magic of being a second time founder is leveraging all the hype that comes of being a second time founder externally without believing any of the hype of being a second time founder internally.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so spot on from the perspective of the more success you get in business, I actually think it's being able to maintain that balance of leveraging that platform to continually get more and more interesting opportunities, work on more and more interesting projects, meet more and more interesting people is absolutely the game. But balancing that out with the similar kind of perspective that there's a lot left to be learned. A lot of people can teach you something that you don't know, right? And how can you keep staying in that learning and discovery mode as opposed to in that expert mode? There's somebody told me something about mentorship that is related to this that I think people listening would probably find really interesting, which is we traditionally in society think of mentorship as like go get somebody that's like done it, like that's 10 years ahead or so.
Mhm.
We're both in our kind of young 30s. The more and more we get into our 30s, the more and more I actually think that you should have like multiple classes of mentors. You should actually, like, I'm trying to find a mentor that's actually 10 years younger than me, right? Which is someone that I can latch onto and be like, when I was 20, I was telling people what's the new interesting product to use, what's the new interesting technology, et cetera. Like, who can mentor me on what's going on there? And then who's in my peer group? And then who's kind of 10 years ahead of me, 5 to 10 years ahead of me, where like they very well still remember the steps that they took that they can kind of guide and coach. And then who's kind of like 30, 40 years ahead of me, where it's like they've ostensibly achieved everything I want to achieve in life. And they're there to tell me, actually, your scorecard is completely screwed up, right? I don't want to go to those people necessarily for like tactical knowledge, but I want to go to them for like everlasting wisdom or like what is actually pervaded or so. So I actually think it's maybe it's interesting for folks listening, but it's kind of like a framework of how can you find like 4 to 5 kind of mentors at each of these different junctures or so. I kind of call it like the like ladders of mentorship, and they're very specific and very different, for the types of things that lead to kind of balanced perspective.
That's great. That's really great advice. That kind of leads me to my next question, which is what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, I think, and I wrote something on Twitter about this recently, actually. I think the number one thing I would have told myself, and I actually wrote this thread for myself. It went viral because I think a lot of others resonated with it. I think it's really, really easy to feel like you're playing the game. And so let me expound on that a little bit. When you think about any activity, let's not take business for a second, right? Let's take any activity. Let's say you want to play basketball, right? Logically, if you were like, I want to know everything there is to know, about, or I want to be a good basketball player. Let's say that was your goal, right? One way you can think about that is you can say, okay, well, to be a good basketball player, I need to know everything about basketball, right? And if I need to know everything about basketball, then I'm gonna go watch a bunch of basketball games. I'm gonna order a bunch of basketball books. I'm gonna listen to a lot of basketball debate shows, right, etc. And month 6, month 7, you get out there and you say, okay, I'm ready. I'm equipped with everything. I know everything there is to know about basketball. And then somebody throws you a basketball, on the playground, and you try to shoot a three, and like you just can't. You don't even know how to shoot the ball. You don't know how to hold the ball. You miss completely, etc. In that obvious, it's super obvious, right? Which is, okay, if you want to be a good basketball player, you just like have to get out there and start, like, pick up a ball, right? You just got to shoot it, etc. um in that example, it's really obvious. In business, I don't think it's obvious. And I think in business, you see this a lot. I definitely was a culprit of doing this. I see this a lot in young people today, which is you get on Twitter, you get on LinkedIn, you read all the business books, you read all the frameworks, right? Um, and the problem with that is you actually delude yourself into thinking that you know about business, right? Because you do, right? You in a sense, you intellectually know about business, right? It's easy to it's easier to understand, you know, how might a customer react academically than when a customer picks up the phone and actually yells at you, right? So one of the things I like to ask people, like when we're hiring them or bringing them in, is I say, okay, you know, we just walked in, right, to a customer's office. They're really unhappy. What do you do, right? And the more junior somebody is, typically they say, okay, well, what I would want to learn about is I would want to learn about why the customer's not happy. I would want to, no, no, no. You just walked in, you're staring at the customer and they're not happy with you. Like, what do you do? Right.
Right.
And you realize the first thing is like, you have to say, hi, right? I'm John, right? Let me introduce myself, right? So the heuristics of, actually being in the game and being in business, you can't you can understand from a P&L that, hey, a customer dropped off and our revenue went down by 20%. You can't simulate the feeling of what happens when a customer calls you and tells you they're churning and your business is going down by 20%. Like, you can't simulate that pit in your stomach, right? When an employee that you trusted with everything picks up the next day and says, actually, I don't want to work here anymore. And you go to an industry conference the next week and they said that they were going to take time off and they actually joined on with a competitor. Like, this has actually happened to me,
Right.
right? Like, these are not fake stories, right? You can't simulate the high or the feeling when you land a customer that's literally going to double your business, and the question mark you're asking is, guys, can we even deliver on this? But you have to, there's this very fine veneer of not being disingenuous or not factual to the customer, but balancing the line and the toe of not sizing yourself out of an opportunity, because those are the opportunities that kick off businesses. This game of constantly managing customers, partners, employees, your financial situation, your board, your investors, if you have any, your own personal psychology. Being an entrepreneur is really lonely, right? It's really lonely. There's not that many things that you can actually tell everybody in the company if you want a good company culture, right?
Mhm.
People are also looking at you as the steward, to run the place, right? And to be the responsible party. So I think more and more, if I was 20 again, and I tell this all the time to people that are young that have the benefit of age, like, I would get in the game, right? Get in the game, right? Be on things like Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Read, obviously, that helps a ton, but just start a project, right? Any project, like, no matter how small it is, just get started, because you're going to start to learn and you're going to start to see, like, if I can make $1 on the internet, right? I can probably make $10. I can probably make 50. I can probably make 100. Well, that soon turns into 100,000 and 500,000 and a million and on and on and on and on, right? But the only way you learn is you actually get in and you do. And if you get paused by the only way I'm going to start is if I can make $1 million, you're just never going to get started. It's too large of a curve to draw. So I think the biggest thing is like we're in the like be behind the computer, read about, observe kind of like world of entrepreneurship. And it's too easy because more and more people are putting out content. So it's easier and easier just to sit and consume content. But I think you really got to like get in there and actually do. That's what I
Yeah.
would tell folks.
I do think like one thing that's always served me is that I was never really good academically, actually. And I always preferred to just like do things and kind of learn. I will say the downside of that is I took much longer routes to learn, right? Because I didn't
Yeah.
do the right research up front. I only learned that later on.
Yeah.
But my default was always, hey, try this thing or like invest in this stock a little bit. And that always forced me to go learn about it, you know? So I'm
Yeah.
always action first, research later.
Yeah. And I think it's like it's a balance, right? Because it's like I view the action first mindset as having utility insofar as it's leading you to some sort of compounding pathway. So I think if you have a ton of bottled up energy, right, and you really, really just want to do something, right, that's great. The question mark is how do you harness that? And so I think there's two parts to that. I think one is the first part of what I was just saying, which is actually get in and do something or so, but have the self-awareness to know what you don't know, right? Which is then to say, okay, how do I surround that then in being in a peer group or in an ecosystem where I can get some support and some structure, right?
Mhm.
Because you can be the smartest person and the most hard driving person at 20, 21, et cetera. And, unless you're one of a billion people in the world, you probably don't have all the answers, and you probably can use a lot from structure, guidance, counsel, etc., from people that have been there and done it, right? And so I think surrounding both of those pieces is very important, so that ultimately it's not directionless ambition, right? It's doing things, it's doing projects, etc. It's getting started, but ultimately building towards an actual end kind of direction or an end outcome or so.
So you have really cool business. I want to spend some time on it. Imagine that I'm 10 years old. Tell me a little bit about what you guys do and what's the service you offer.
Yeah. So I think the best way to explain to a 10-year-old what we do is we help people that want to find great work, work at places that they want to be taken on as, right? And so, if you were 10 years old and you wanted to be a firefighter, it's our job to help you find where you can go be a firefighter, right? That's kind of the simplest way to think about a staffing business, right? Our business is not only staffing, we're a total talent management company and a workforce management company. And so what that means is we look at staffing as our core business, helping people find opportunities, and the inverse, helping companies find the people for their opportunities, right? Kind of both sides of the spectrum. But then what we do is we take that as a unit and we unbundle and we overbundle, right? So when we keep unbundling at its core components, we do something also called payrolling and independent contractor management, which is a company has found an individual that they want to work with. They don't actually need recruiting support, but they need a bunch of administrative, tax, legal, benefits, compliance support. And so we help support by taking those people onto our company. They become our employees, and we help with all of the administration that goes, behind those individuals. We also bundle up and go
That's
on the
called PEO, right? What does that stand for?
so PEO is actually a platform that we use underneath as a technology to manage the compliance and such. The service that we put on top of that is what we call payrolling and independent contractor management. So it's a
Okay.
services solution that sits upon a technology. But that's exactly right, right? So companies at the end of the day want to use an outsourced provider that can basically help them with all of the fine details of managing employees,
And why
right?
do they want to do that? Like, my simplistic understanding is I'm Pepsi Cola, or tell me a little,
Yep.
maybe you can use one of your customers as an example. I
Yeah.
just put up a job on a job board like Indeed and LinkedIn. Somebody
Yep.
applies. Great.
Yep.
Okay. You're going to work in one of our warehousing facilities.
Yeah.
You get hired, you get put on payroll, and you get paid.
Yes.
Why would a company hire you guys and not want to do the kind of my simplistic understanding of how
Yeah,
the world
absolutely.
works?
So they do your understanding, right? Because there's obviously full-time talent, there's internal recruiters, there's internal HR organizations, et cetera. What's happening in our space, so we one thing to clarify is we primarily will actually pretty much entirely focus on contract workers, or what we call contingent workers, right? So hourly workers. And what's happening more and more in the workforce generally in enterprises is more and more of a population of the employee base is becoming contingent workers as opposed to full-time workers. So in kind of the consumer apps we all use every day, we understand that as the gig economy. Think of your DoorDashes, your Ubers, your Lyfts, et cetera. But when you actually think of the Fortune 500 ecosystem or Fortune 2000 ecosystem in this country, what you find is a larger and larger portion of the employee population is actually this contingent worker population as opposed to the full-time population. The reason for that is as more and more companies are agile, taking on new types of projects, new divisions, so on and so forth, they're able to scale up and scale down their workforce as opposed to having a static workforce that's all kind of on their books or on their permanent payroll. And so the demand for organizations like ours actually becomes higher and higher as the percentage of the workforce becomes more and more contingent. And so one of the other services, kind of like if you go up the stack, one of the other services we do is we do something called managed services, which is when a company says, okay, it's not that we just use one staffing company, right? Maybe we use 50 staffing companies or 100 staffing companies because we spend, like a PepsiCo would spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on contractors. What starts to happen internally is, Sieva might be using Romeen's company, and Sieva's, colleague might be using Romeen's competitor, right? And we don't really have visibility on, maybe Romeen's rates are better than Romeen's competitor. Maybe Romeen's competitor is better at a certain type of talent than Romeen's company is better at. We as an organization, as Pepsi, don't actually have any visibility, right, into all the different companies we're using, all the rates that we're paying, all the people that we're employing. And so what are the compliance, headaches, and what are the legal headaches that go with that? And so there's a lot of opportunity to basically say, okay, great, we can actually manage this much more holistically, right? And so for a lot of our enterprise clients, we actually go even further up the stack. We implement a technology, we put a full team, a full consulting team in place that basically manages this entire operation, right, on behalf of companies, right? So as this population is just getting more and more embedded in the enterprise, there's more and more opportunity for these types of different solutions to take place.
So I'm hearing you remove complexity for the employer, you increase their
Yep.
flexibility, and you also
Yep.
increase flexibility for employees who maybe want to spend, 4 days a week working at Pepsi and 1 day working at Amazon, and you
Yeah.
can kind of help shuffle them around based on
That's
on their schedules or what they want to do.
that's exactly right. That's
Okay.
exactly right. Yep.
So this business, compared to everything else that I learned about, sounds incredibly complicated, right? If you're at like zero and you're just an entrepreneurial person and you just want to start something,
Yeah.
like I can start a landscaping business, I'll
Yeah.
figure out how to cut grass, maybe I'll watch some videos on how to hedge the bushes,
Yeah.
and then I'll go and I'll knock on doors until somebody hires me, and little
Yeah.
by little I can grow my business.
Yeah.
If you were just starting your business today, tell me
Yeah.
about the first 3 months and how do you get to a place where you're making some money to feed your
Yeah.
family?
So I actually think this business is much more complicated to go from one to N, meaning it's very complicated to scale. And I think it's actually really easy to get started. I think it's actually really easy to go 0 to 1. I actually think that's why when you look at the landscape, what you see is you see a lot of really mom and pop staffing companies and really, really small staffing companies, or kind of like freelance recruiters, right? And I think you start to see less and less kind of mid-size or larger staffing companies. And I think you see even less and less total workforce management or total talent management companies. So I think I think scaling this business is actually very difficult. I actually think that's where a lot of the rewards come in when you get to scale, right? But I actually think starting this business is pretty easy. So the way that I would start this business is first is, I would start with the staffing kind of piece. I wouldn't start with any of the other pieces, right? Payrolling, workforce management, et cetera. Those pieces really come into bear once you have some scale and you have some operational sophistication. On the staffing side, what I would do is then I would kind of unpair that and say, what are the two things that I need to be good at to be a good staffing person? One is I probably need to be good at recruiting, right? And the other is I need to be good at sales. So I would actually take the very similar landscaping approach. I'd knock on doors. I probably wouldn't start with the Fortune 500 or so. They're not going to give me the time of day, right? I would go to maybe some local businesses in town, right? And say, who needs talent? Everybody's hiring, right? or everybody's not hiring, but some folks are hiring, right? And I'd go to those companies and say, what are your needs? How can I help you, et cetera? Let me learn a little bit more about those businesses. Maybe I would climb into my toolkit to understand, based on my experience, what are businesses or sectors or types of people that I know. If I'm coming out of college, um, maybe I don't know a whole ton about business, but I know a lot of people in my class, or I know a lot of people in college. And so I have an interesting talent pool of sorts that I can offer to people, right? And it's a service I can provide, to my classmates to help them get jobs. And then I'd either try to be a good recruiter, or I would go get a recruiting partner, right? If that wasn't something that I was great at. And a good recruiting partner, I think anybody can be a good recruiter, actually. I think a good recruiting partner would educate you on, what are the types of things that, companies look for, what makes for a good hire, et cetera. And so I either think you go get a recruiting partner, or you are the recruiter yourself. And
And
that's
then what,
actually
you're
how I would
posting
get
on
started.
Indeed, you're like hitting people up on LinkedIn, you're doing
Yeah,
interviews.
totally, right?
Yeah.
Like I would start very, very small. And again, I think not focused on how do I build this big business, but just what is my edge in terms of recruiting?
Mhm.
Who are the types of people that I have access to that maybe other people don't have access to? Everybody has access because everybody's a part of some community, some network, etc. And so I would focus on how can I help some of those people get jobs, right?
And
And
how
that's
much
how
do you
you
charge
actually
for
get
that?
started.
How much would you charge for that?
So you can charge in all sorts of different ways. There's different business models. You can do what's called a markup model, right? Which is if you were to have somebody actually be your own employee, right? And so, by the way, I wouldn't start on the contract side because that really requires more infrastructure. I'd probably start on the full time side. On the contract side, if somebody's your own employee, you're responsible for their FICA, SUDA, FUDA, et cetera, because they're technically your employee. And so your charge would be that is just cost that goes out, and then you would charge a markup on top of that for your fees. If you're charging for a permanent placement, which is totally where I would start if I was getting started, which is just see if I place you at a company, whatever your first year salary is, I'm going to charge a portion of that, maybe 20%, maybe 25%, et cetera. Right. And it just kind of helps me get started. It turns out that you place 5 people, that make 100 grand each, and you take 20 to 25 grand, is $100,000, right? With a relatively limited kind of, budget for tools, et cetera, and kind of some sweat equity and muscle, you could probably get there in 3-ish months or so, right?
Yeah. I
And
love
and
those
so
kind of businesses. I
yeah,
love when you can tell someone, hey, if you just hustle hard and you work for it very quickly, you can be profitable here, right?
that's exactly right.
Placing 3 to 5 people in your first year is not a crazy number, right? If
Not
you're
at all.
working on it every single day, if you're really knocking on doors and hitting
Yep.
people up on LinkedIn, it's totally doable.
It's
And
totally
and I
doable.
love those
And if you think
businesses.
about it that way, which is like, okay, I place 7 people in a year, right? And I have some stability in terms of like the cash flow can be lumpy from that, let's say, right? But let's say that's about 150 grand, right? And let's say you're running 50 grand of expenses, which would be aggressive, but let's say you are, right? If you could convince yourself that, hey, in my first year of doing business and kind of being on my own, I can get a 6-figure salary, right? I can kind of get started. That's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a personality type that comes with that, because I think what people, and this is again kind of the veneer of entrepreneurship versus the reality of entrepreneurship, which is the headline number sounds great. You would kind of say, well, shouldn't every recruiter just go quit their job tomorrow then? The reality is you're responsible for everything now. You're responsible for bringing in the client, for finding the candidate, for recruiting, for the actual delivery, for finance, for all of the different pieces, which is a lot, right? And so it's you would have to, I think you would only have to take that jump if you really felt that you could make a bigger splash.
Tell us a little bit about the economics of your business. Anything you can share would be super interesting.
So not a ton I can kind of publicly share, but I can give kind of broad stroke veneers. So we've been growing, kind of a healthy 30 to 50% a year for the last 3 or so years or so annually. And it's been really interesting. The economics certainly get better with scale. We recently brought in private equity at the end of Q2. And we have a relatively large offshore operation. We've got over 100 folks in India. And then we've got a bunch of folks here in the US as well, all over the US. And so now actually really what we're focused on is, kind of in taking the business to the next level of scale, there's absolutely economies of scale that start to come into play. And so we're really using those economies of scale and the cash flow that comes from that to explore adjacent business products and adjacent verticals that we can expand into. And we're going to get really heavy into M&A as well, right? And starting to buy other companies as well. And so this business, I think, generally is one in which the size of which, we have gotten to now.
Can you give us a range of size, like 0 to 1 million, 1 to 50, 50 plus?
Yeah,
Where are you guys at, kind of ballpark?
for sure. So 50 plus for sure,
Yeah.
right?
Wow. Amazing.
And so there's kind of broad higher end strokes there, but let's call it kind of 50 plus, right?
Sure.
And so once you start to get to that scale, there's definitely pretty interesting things that you can start to do, right?
Yeah.
And so now, kind of as the next chapter, what we're really focused on is using some of those economies of scale, et cetera, to do some interesting things organically, but then actually starting to focus inorganically a lot more as well now, too.
So you're out there acquiring businesses, you're growing your own business.
Yeah.
This is exciting, man. I really appreciate you taking time with me today. This was fun.
Yeah, no, this was a ton of fun. And you guys are doing something super awesome and something I love as an alternative message around entrepreneurship at Enduring that I think is just a lot more people need to hear about, right? And it's a very empowering model of entrepreneurship. So you're doing the good work, man.
Thanks, man. And that's it for this week's episode of Boring Businesses. I'm your host, Sieva Kaczynski. Thank you for watching or listening today. Any resources we mentioned during the show, we'll make sure to link in the show notes or below the video. If you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, please leave me a review. It really helps me learn, and it allows other people to discover the podcast as well. Thanks again, and make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.